Chapter 27. The Roar in a Rain of Tears. Another moonlit night swept across the tiled rooftops of Konoha. As always, the village blissfully slumbered under the ever-watchful eye of the Anbu. It was also another late night for the Hokage, who was finishing up the day's paperwork. Just as he had scrawled his signature across a trade permit, he paused his pen. He could sense someone heading straight for his office. A moment later, a red-haired ninja using the body flicker technique appeared in the space before him. From the disheveled appearance and the smell, Naruto looked as though he hadn't bathed in days. More importantly, he was alone when Hiruzen had received a messenger bird from Kakashi informing him that the whole team was on their way back. "Naruto, where's the rest of your team?" asked Hiruzen. "I'm a clone," said Naruto. "I wanted to know why you sent that missive to Team Shirakumo telling us to stay in Wave Country." Alarms started going off in Hiruzen's head. If such a missive was sent out, it was not under my authority. "Naruto, what is going on?" The hard look in Naruto's eyes told Hiruzen that this had only confirmed the boy's suspicions. "I'm guessing someone intercepted my messenger birds. They must have also forged your seal on a fake missive to keep our teams in Wave Country. I tried getting here as fast as I could, but I had to conserve chakra. I'm going to report back." The clone broke off. His eyes widening, he fell to his knees. In a cloud of smoke, he disappeared. Naruto, POV. Slowly, Naruto rose to his feet. Everything was very still. And larger, as though magnified. Or was it his senses instead? Taking in his surroundings, he surmised in an instant what had happened. While Naruto had fought the hunter Nin, Shirakumo had died trying to take down Hidan, and to finish the job, Rai had paid with his life. Further out, Naruto could see yet another body sigh. But his chest alone moved up and down, breathing. "Kakuzu, you bastard, where are you? Come back here and bring me my body." It was Hidan's head, sitting at least a dozen yards away from its body. Impossibly, Hidan seemed to have survived even a beheading. The earth shook and in a daze, Naruto looked up. Snow drifted serenely down from the sky as a raging battle played out in the background. Jiraiya faced off against Kakuzu and what appeared to be 4 black humanoid masses. It didn't seem right to Naruto. His teammates were no longer here. And yet the world continued to move. Some of the snow that had been falling had melted, and the ground shimmered with water. Naruto caught a glimpse of his reflection. Crowning a blank face, his hair burned like fire and his whisker marks stood out starkly. Droplets of blood rolled off his chin and landed in the water, dyeing it red, and his reflection disappeared. This quiet, burning sensation. He had never felt like this before. No. That wasn't quite right. He had felt it once before. He could remember now. It had happened years ago, and the memory of it had been forcibly taken from him. But it was all coming back. Everything was fuzzy and dim. He could hear the sound of running water. The back of his head throbbed where they had struck him. He wondered where his captors were taking him. He wished he had remembered to wear his scarf to cover his face. Maybe all this wouldn't have been happening then. There was someone still fighting his captors. He didn't know who it was. They were strong, and several of his captors groaned and fell to the ground. Eventually, however, his captors managed to put a sword through their chest. The person collapsed, and their mask fell off. With a jolt, he saw the face of the woman who slammed bowls of rice down on his table every day. She had never had a kind word for him before, and yet she had fought for him. Now, she was gone. Something inside him snapped. Everything he had ever felt in his short life came together into a single, black emotion. It seethed and roiled. It wanted release. His vision was turning red. A guttural sound filled the tunnel, and he soon realized it was coming from him. The next thing he heard was the sounds of his captors screaming. Before long, bodies floated face down at his feet in a river of blood. Back in the present, Naruto opened his eyes. An immense metal gate loomed before him. Something huge and dark lurked behind it, a single seal on the gate doors blocked its escape. He knew it was the only thing preventing the demon it held captive from devouring him. "So you've finally come to me of your own will," a deep voice filled his head. "What changed?" "There's nothing holding me back anymore," said Naruto. The demon roared in laughter. "You finally understand." A wave of dark tainted chakra surged out from between the bars of the demon's cage and entered Naruto. He felt his depleted chakra reserves fill up to the brim and then some more as it overflowed and enveloped his entire body. He had never felt so much chakra before. It almost felt as though it was eating away at his own body. Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. He had carried its burden and ignorance for many years and upon his revelation, tried to deny it. Though he hadn't wanted to admit it, he had been afraid of the consequences. But all that was gone. There was nothing he had left to lose. Now, he decided, it was time to embrace it. Kakashi POV. Forget about me. Tazuna yelled. Just go. Kakashi hesitated. More than anything, he wanted to investigate the source of the ground tremors. He could feel it in his gut that it was linked to his team's disappearance. But after all that he'd done to defend the old bridge builder from Zabuza, he couldn't leave him there by himself. Nor did it seem like a good idea to bring him along. After a moment's thought, Kakashi summoned back his Ninken pack. Take him to safety, he instructed his hounds. In agitation, Tazuna bobbed his head. I'll be fine. Your students need you. He nodded. With a final look back at Zabuza's still body, he left. As Kakashi ran alone through the fog, the ghostly image of the masked man who had killed Zabuza floated into his mind. He had disappeared before Kakashi could give chase, leaving behind only questions. The strange thing was, even though it was his first time seeing the man, he had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be their last. The marshlands passed quickly. As the air grew colder, the tremors grew more pronounced. He knew that he was drawing close. He could only pray that he wasn't too late. Kakuzu, POV. Kakuzu couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a bad day, and he had lived a long life. It didn't rank quite as high as the day he'd returned to his village following his failed assassination attempt on the first Hokage. Nothing ever would, but it was up there. It didn't help that once again, he was battling for his life against a leaf nin. It rankled that he was even here. While Jiraiya's head would have made an excellent trophy, Kakuzu would have preferred to fight him on a stage of his own choosing. No, the only reason he was here at all was because of the leader's orders. Don't lay a hand on the Jinchuriki. Capture the Jinchuriki's teammates. Kill everyone but the Jinchuriki. Easier said than done when the Jinchuriki kept popping up in his vicinity and when everyone included one of the Sannin. Kakuzu knew that the Nine Tails had to be extracted last. So why go after its Jinchuriki at all at this time? What was the point? Nonetheless, he carried out his orders without question, even while that bastard Hidan was talking his ear off with his complaining. He trusted that the leader always knew what he was doing. Still, he couldn't shake off the sense that there was someone else pulling the strings, pushing around Kakuzu as a pawn in their game. Suddenly, Kakuzu was yanked out of his thoughts when the sage froze, halting his assault. And then Kakuzu felt it too. A wave of vile chakra blasted into the air. It was powerful enough that the force of it alone blew away the fog in their vicinity. Kakuzu immediately spotted the source. It was the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, surrounded in a translucent shroud that he recognized as the tailed beast's chakra. 4 tails, made out of the same vile chakra, churned wildly at his back. The 7 tails Jinchuriki they had captured had resorted to using this power too, before they overpowered her. With a stab of annoyance, he wondered whether Hidan had violated the leader's orders and attacked the Jinchuriki. Kakuzu's battle against Jiraiya had not afforded him many chances to check in on how his idiot partner was doing. Then, he saw the headless body. Oi, Kakuzu. The head howled. As he watched, 2 of the Jinchuriki's chakra tails picked up the body and ripped it apart with ease. The remaining tails picked up the screaming head and slammed it down with a force that split the ground in 2. Well, there goes another partner. Jiraiya POV. Powerful gales of wind accompanied every swing of the beast's tails. The sheer force of its chakra warmed the atmosphere, causing the snow to melt into a shower of rain. To Jiraiya, its overwhelming chakra seemed to be the very embodiment of nature. It was hard to believe this demon was Naruto. No, he mentally corrected himself. This was the Nine Tails emerging from Naruto. Somehow, the seal had weakened enough for it to physically manifest itself. The beast turned its hate-filled gaze on Gamabunta. Its tails whipped through the air toward them, and Gamabunta braced himself, ready to return the blow when the tails arched around them and slammed instead into Kakuzu. The missing nin, who had been on the verge of striking an unsuspecting Jiraiya, bulleted down through the rain and crashed into the wet ground. Torrents of mud flew in every direction as his body continued to bowl through the earth, leaving behind a long, uninterrupted strip in his wake. Stunned, Jiraiya watched the beast let out a deafening howl that shook the skies. Kakashi POV. The moment Kakashi felt the Nine Tails chakra surge through the marshland and blow away the fog, he braced himself for the worst. And yet, nothing could have prepared him for the scene of carnage that met his arrival. At the base of a cliff, bodies with all too familiar faces littered the muddy ground. It was an image that brought back painful memories of the Third World War. His colleague and fellow veteran, Shirakumo. A crater with a body mangled beyond recognition. And Rai. His student. His eyes were still open, staring glassily up at the gray sky. The day he had first met his Genin team flashed in his mind. You can tell me your likes, dislikes, hobbies, your dreams. When nobody answered, Kakashi sighed and gestured towards a Genin with a scar running down his face. How about you go first? The boy scowled. The name's Hagana Rai. My goal is to become the best weapons specialist in Konoha. And I hate being ordered around. The sound of rain filled his ears. As he watched the droplets hit the boy's still face, Kakashi's heart grew heavy. It seemed like it was only yesterday when his team had passed the bell test. The air crackled. A blood-red ball of chakra shot through the sky and slammed into the cliff with a thunderous explosion. Breaking off from the point of impact, giant boulders began sliding down, crashing into the ground. Jiraiya POV. Toad oil bomb. A mass of murky oil burst through the air, coating the rampaging beast. Jiraiya followed by directing his spiky white hair to wrap itself tightly around the beast, dragging it down to the ground. For a moment it seemed to work, and then with another roaring surge of chakra, it burst out of its bindings. Infuriated, the beast switched its attention from Jiraiya, who was forced to dodge out of the way. Kakuzu seemed to have had enough, taking this as a window of opportunity to escape. Jiraiya saw out of the corner of his eye as the hulking missing nin leaped backwards and flickered away in a puff of smoke. "Jiraiya-sama," shouted a voice. A familiar silver-haired ninja appeared, gently setting down 3 bodies beside a shrub. Jiraiya did a double take. "Is that you, Kakashi? Did Sarutobi-sensei send you?" Kakashi stood, his infamous Sharingan glowing in his left eye. "It's a long story." Naruto, POV. It was as though he was viewing everything from a distance, through a red haze. He was in control of his body, and at the same time, he was watching his own body move. Hidan was dead, or at least crushed beyond repair, and Kakuzu seemed to have disappeared. His enemies were gone, and Naruto knew he had already achieved his objective. And yet, it wasn't enough. There was a void deep in his chest that he didn't know how to fill. He could feel his body thrashing about, itching with the desire to be put into action. To go somewhere. Anywhere. And not come back. Only, there was nowhere to go. He had longed to leave Wave Country and return to Konoha. But there was nothing for him there anymore. The marshlands stretched out into infinity behind him, while to his front, past the edge of the cliff, he could see a dark sheet of water. It was the sea, disappearing into the horizon. He wondered what lay beyond there. Pushing back, he readied himself to propel his body forward and… "Naruto," a faraway voice shouted. It took a moment to process that it was his name being called. Naruto blinked, and all of a sudden, Kakashi stood beside him in his mind. His left eye glowed red. He had activated the Sharingan. Naruto took an involuntary step back. He had seen Kakashi use it sparingly in battle, but never before like this. The Nine-Tails let out a growl. You're not an Uchiha." Ignoring the beast, Kakashi turned towards Naruto. "What's going on here? Where's Mayu?" Naruto didn't respond, and the Jonin's face turned solemn. "Come back, Naruto. This isn't the answer." "What would you know, sensei?" The part of Naruto that was still rational knew it wasn't Kakashi's fault. But bitter words were coming out of his mouth, like vomit, and he couldn't hold them back. "It's not like you were here when everyone died." Kakashi drew a sharp breath. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I came as quickly as I could." For some reason, the apology only made him angrier. "It doesn't matter anymore. I failed my mission, my team is gone. There's nothing for me to care about anymore. Do you know how that feels?" "I do," said Kakashi. Taken aback despite himself, Naruto stopped. The Jonin's gaze, while trained on Naruto, seemed to be focused on something far away. "I also lost my team in the World War. Obito and Rin. They're gone because of my failures." "Ignore him," the Nine-Tails snarled. "He's only trying to confuse you." It would have been all too easy to do as the Nine-Tails said. It was tempting enough that Naruto almost gave into it. But as he considered Kakashi's words, he could feel his anger seeping away. And in its place, he started to remember things. He thought of his first day at the academy, when he had felt like the only person in the world. He thought of the day he first killed as a Genin and fell asleep to the rocking of the wagon. He thought of his birthday, in which Mayu baked a too-sweet cake and Kakashi presented him with a tanto. He thought of the Chunin exams, looking up at a dark ceiling and Rai asking if he was awake. He thought of Mayu calling down to him in his fight against Fu. He thought of their team, sitting down at Ichiraku's after a hard mission and ordering extra garlic with their ramen. At the time, these moments had not seemed so precious to him. Only now that they were gone did he understand. Something in his chest throbbed and Naruto clutched it. He could feel the void there, but he couldn't reach it. "How do you deal with it, sensei?" "You fool," howled the Nine Tails. Kakashi inclined his head. "We endure." Jiraiya POV. The beast that had been bristling suddenly seemed to shrivel up before his eyes. Its baleful eyes dimming, it shrank in size, and finally, as the red demon shroud smoldered away into nothing, Jiraiya jumped forward to catch Naruto's body in midair. The body, as scratched and beaten up as it was, seemed almost lifeless. However, Jiraiya could feel his heart beating in a steady rhythm, and for that, he was thankful. As he walked back, he saw Kakashi kneel and close the eyes of the Chunin boy. Standing up, the Jonin bowed his head in prayer. Jiraiya somberly looked down at Naruto's still face and then around at their surroundings. At some point in the night, the rain had stopped. The sun was rising, bleaching the sky in its vivid colors. It was a new day. Kakuzu, POV. Kakuzu didn't call it running away. He called it a tactical retreat. The Sannin had been enough trouble on his own. With the Jinchuriki rampaging and then the copy ninja showing up to the battle, he had made the executive decision that it was high time he left the country. Sans his irritating partner. He had finally reached the forest when without warning, he sensed someone following him. "Kakuzu-san. Kakuzu-san." It was a high-pitched voice that Kakuzu despised from the bottom of his many hearts. Turning back, sure enough, he saw an orange mask gaining on him. "What is it?" he grunted. "You sure hightailed it out of there," said Toby in a cheery voice. "If you were worth the slightest bit of money, I'd kill you." "That doesn't sound likely. Unless the leader makes me your next partner." Toby began to sound worried. "That'd be dangerous, considering how quickly you go through them. I'd be doing the world a favor, getting rid of you." Kakuzu paused, fully taking in Toby's appearance. He was carrying something large on his back, and suddenly, he wondered what the man he regarded as the leader's big mistake was even doing there. Toby must have noticed him watching. It was difficult to tell through the mask, but to Kakuzu, it almost seemed as though he was smiling. "Don't worry. This isn't anything you need to concern yourself about." Some time later. Somehow, the Hokage had already gotten wind of the fiasco in Wave Country. By the time Kakashi and the others returned to the safe house, there were several Anbu ops scouting the perimeter. With the help of the reinforcements from Konoha, the matter was quickly wrapped up. The Wave Country's daimyo and his children were returned to their vassals. Shirakumo's Genin team was informed of his passing. A sallow-looking woman was transported back to the village for further interrogation. A search party was sent out to retrieve Mayu's body, only to return empty-handed. Finally, the rest returned home. The day after their return, a funeral service was held. Half the village turned up, the procession led by Mayu and Rai's older brothers and Shirakumo's grieving daughter. Knowing their history, Kakashi had half expected Izumo to blame Naruto. But with tears streaming freely down his face, the Chunin seemed lost in his own inner conflict. Shirakumo's Genin team was there, along with many of the other Genins. At the mention of Rai's name in the Hokage's funeral address, a young Kunoichi with hair rolled up into buns burst into tears. And then it was over. That day, a somber pallor seemed to have been temporarily cast over the village, shutters were drawn, and lights were dimmed. As the skies grew dark, everyone returned to their homes, turning in early for the night. All, except for one. From a distance, Kakashi watched Naruto stand before the memorial stone, to which 3 names had been newly added. The next day, Jiraiya approached Kakashi with a proposal to take Naruto along on a journey. Once given the choice, Naruto thought over it for a few minutes before giving his answer. Somewhere hidden deep in the depths of Konoha, the members of the underground organization Root gathered before their leader, Danzo. Most people were not even aware of its existence. Under the orders of the third Hokage, Root had officially disbanded following the downfall of the Uchiha clan. However, to this day, the organization continued to operate in secret as the unseen force supporting the Great Tree of Konoha. One of its members kneeled before Danzo now, having finished his report. He had been sent to Wave Country as part of the Jinchuriki's team to keep an eye on his activity. However, his report was incomplete. The operative had been knocked unconscious halfway through the final battle. The only other witnesses present for the remainder of the battle, Jiraiya and Kakashi, were staunchly loyal to Hiruzen, leaving Danzo to grasp in the dark as to what had occurred. It was an unfortunate turn of events, especially given the operative's previously spotless track record. It was his first failure. Perhaps that was the reason why, while giving his report, the operative seemed uncharacteristically distracted. After dismissing the operative, Danzo stood by himself in the darkness, thinking. Whatever had happened in Wave Country, it made little difference in the end. No matter what Hiruzen said, he was not stupid enough to trust the Jinchuriki to stay loyal to the Leaf. He had heard reports that the Jinchuriki would soon be leaving the village again for an extended period of time, and it was clear to Danzo that Hiruzen was growing soft in his old age. As he considered his next move, Danzo regarded his right arm with a baleful glare. He would bide his time for now. But sooner or later, the Nine Tails' power would be his. On the morning of their departure, just as they reached the gate, Naruto stopped. He turned around and gazed up at the stone faces of the Hokage monument before closing his eyes. As the sun's glow warmed his face, he could hear the other villagers streaming past him, the chatter of their daily life resounding in his ears. Market prices have gone up lately. Going to meet my uncle in Tea Country. A cake for her birthday. His eyes opened. Turning back around, he saw Jiraiya waiting for him. Naruto took a step forward. And another. And then, walking through the gates, he left Konoha behind. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28. Emergence of Talents. It was raining in Amigakure, the hidden rain, but that was nothing new. Neon signs flickered, glowing sullenly in the dark of the night. Numerous metal pipes scaled a sea of rusty towers that groaned under their own weight. Copper wires, dangling from tower to tower, swayed haphazardly in the wind. To the west, the tallest tower in Amigakure spiraled above the surrounding area. Other than its height, it was easily made distinguishable by the four humanoid faces that protruded from each side of the tower. The village's dead were all brought to this tower for processing. It was also the rumored dwelling of their savior, Lord Pain. Ever since the lady had brought news of their lord's victory over Hanzo to the village, the hard look in everyone's eyes had changed. Ajisai could still remember the first time she saw the lady appear before the village people. With her beautiful stoic face and her wings that spanned the length of the sky, she looked every bit the role of an angel sent from the heavens. It was so overwhelming, Ajisai cried. News quickly spread of Lord Pain after that. Following the deaths of Hanzo and the members of his faction, the civil war they had thought would never end came to a close. Now, the entire village was united under Lord Pain's mission of peace and hope. Lady Angel warned them that the hidden villages of the five great nations would not react so favorably to Hanzo's death, and so, they continued to perpetuate the notion that their civil war was still ongoing. Months had passed since then, and none of the other villages seemed to have noticed. Nobody, Ajisai included, was too surprised. Given the other nations' history of waging battle in Rain territory and causing further havoc for their village, she didn't expect them to care about anything other than themselves. It was raining, as always, when Lady Angel appeared before Ajisai and the other Genin. She descended without warning, her paper wings keeping her afloat. As she turned her pale, serene face towards them, Ajisai froze, her mind reeling at suddenly coming face to face with her idol. Then, coming to her senses, she immediately prostrated herself on the ground. The Hidden Leaf has invited the Hidden Rain to participate in their Chunin selection exams this year. Your teams will go, in the pretense of participating. The other villages must continue to believe that Hanzo of the Salamander rules the Hidden Rain. Yes, Tenshi-sama, they spoke in unison. Team Ajisai, said the lady, and Ajisai found her mind once again going into overdrive at the revelation that the lady knew her name. I have a special mission for you. Take advantage of the Chunin exams to find a Jinchuriki. A Jinchuriki? Ajisai cautiously ventured, raising her head. Surin. The lady looked at one of her teammates. Use your sensory perception skills and look for a shinobi who harbors an enormous amount of chakra. Is that what a Jinchuriki is? Asked Surin. Without answering his question, the lady continued, even if you don't find a Jinchuriki, bring back intel of any extraordinary shinobi from other villages. She heard the sound of flapping wings. And then the lady was gone. The other Genin began to murmur in awe amongst themselves. Ajisai shared a nod with Surin before turning to her third teammate. He was a relative newcomer to their village. He had a pretty face but didn't talk much, speaking only when necessary. Ajisai did not know much about him beyond that he was yet another war refugee. And that he was incredibly strong. With him by their side, Ajisai had little doubt that they would be able to carry out the lady's mission to the finish. When she saw his face, however, she found herself taken aback. The usual calm demeanor was gone. Instead, a blazing look of fury burned in his eyes, and she could see his visible hand clench so hard, it shook. It wouldn't be the first time that a war refugee in their village had suffered at the hands of the Hidden Leaf. Sympathy welling up in her heart, Ajisai wondered whether her teammate was the same. Gaara POV. For as long as Gaara could remember, the voice had always been there, whispering in his head. When he was younger, while he was aware of the voice's presence, he did not understand it. It was purely a constant stream of noise, its volume and tone tended to vary by the day, and it was relentless. He did not understand it, but it kept him up at nights when the rest of the village had gone to sleep and the sand of the desert shimmered like water in the moonlight. It was on the night of a full moon that Gaara fell to his knees before the dying body of his uncle and felt its blood boil for the first time. The sensation racked the entire length of his body and it was unbearable. The sand that had always served as his protection erupted around him and everything that had been building up inside exploded into mindless, unadulterated rage. By the time the sand settled down, he knew that it was not just a voice, it was the voice of the monster inside of him, and it told him he was alone in the world. Over the years, Gaara's father, the Kazekage, tried to assassinate him 5 more times, but he survived and persisted. Shukaku continued to torment him, threatening to take over his body the moment he let down his guard, but while Gaara no longer slept, he continued to fight. His father hated him. His siblings dreaded him. His village feared him. Yet Gaara alone loved himself. And so, he lived. When he grew older, he was placed in a 3-man team with his siblings. However, while he was initially signed up to participate in the Chunin exams held at their village, upon receiving the list of registered genin from the other villages, his father withdrew Gaara from the exam. With Kankuro's promotion to the rank of Chunin, Gaara's current team consisted of his sister Temari and another genin whose name he didn't bother to remember. She was a replacement of a replacement. Gaara had killed the first following a disagreement on a mission. He didn't expect the new genin to last much longer. At some point, members of another village began to show up in his village. They were from Atagakur, the hidden sound. Though Gaara didn't know nor care for the details, he knew that the 2 villages were plotting to attack one of their former allies, the Hidden Leaf. Stating a period of mourning, Konoha had not held a public Chunin exam in some time. However, this year, as hosts of the exams, they were finally opening their doors to the other villages once more. From the increased frequency of meetings between his father and the Sound's representatives, Gaara knew it was time to strike. Nights passed, and the day of their departure grew closer. Gaara sometimes closed his eyes to rest them, but he dared not sleep. In the full moon, its blood boiled. Sasuke, POV. It was a dark, quiet night. The moon hung low in the sky, a giant pale orb that witnessed all in silence. He was there, standing before him. Foolish little brother. If you want to kill me, then blame me. Hate me. And live on in shame. Run and run. Glowing red eyes with spinning black tomo pierced into him, and suddenly he could see the members of his clan falling in slow motion around him. One by one, they died in a spurt of red blood, and soon, he was the only one left. His brother turned his back to him. Cling desperately to life. Then one day, come before me with the same eyes I bear now. Oi, Sasuke. Are you even listening to me? His eyes slightly widening, Sasuke refocused his gaze on his teammate. Ah. Sorry, what were you saying? From his reclining position against a railing, Menma rolled his eyes. I said, I heard rumors that the Hidden Mist isn't participating in this year's Chunin exam. They're in mourning since their Mizukage died, or something. Show some respect, Menma, Sakura snapped. How would you feel if it was the Lord Third who died? That's a moot point because that old man's never going to die, said Menma in a smug tone. Sasuke looked down his reflection in the water below the bridge. It wasn't that long ago that our own village was in mourning. In the corner of his eye, he observed both of his teammates exchanging somber looks. Well, Menma said in a fake cheerful voice. It's the first time in years Konoha is hosting an open Chunin exam. I heard it's going to be a pretty big deal, with a bunch of villages attending. Everyone who's not on a mission is being called back for security. He hesitated. Do you think Naruto will come back for it? Who knows? Even Kakashi-sensei's been very hush-hush about the whole situation. Sakura gave Sasuke a coy look. Has he told you anything, Sasuke-kun? Over the past 2 years, the Jonin known as Copy Ninja Kakashi had taken over their late teacher's responsibilities. In that time, Sasuke had come to realize that Kakashi's seemingly lackadaisical demeanor was merely a front. There was true steel to his gaze and a lifetime of hard-fought battle experience to back it. Sasuke never asked any questions. However, following the events of Wave Country, there was a mutual unspoken understanding to let sleeping dogs lie. Not really, he said. Taking his hands off the railing, he left his teammates and began to head back towards the training grounds. As they always did, Sasuke's thoughts trailed back to the moonlit events of his past. He knew that he was growing stronger with every single passing day. But Itachi's words gnawed at him deep inside had been gnawing at him. Going on B rank missions and the occasional A rank, sparring with his teammates, waiting to be promoted to the rank of Jonin. Was that all there was to it? Was that enough to kill his older brother? Sasuke didn't have to search deep in his heart to know that it wasn't. The only way to defeat Itachi would be to obtain the same eyes as him. The question was, how? This was where Kakashi came in. Sasuke knew that the Jonin somehow had the Sharingan. He had caught a glimpse of it once before, when a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into a full-on skirmish with enemy forces in Rain Country. However, Kakashi had never brought it up again. Until yesterday, when out of the blue, he had offered to train him one-on-one. Sasuke's cynicism warred with his frustration, and frustration won the bout. There was a restless energy inside of him that refused to subside, and he wondered whether training with Kakashi would be enough to subdue it. Before Sasuke reached the training grounds, he caught sight of the figure of his thoughts and came to a stop. Kakashi was standing in front of the memorial stone. Sasuke couldn't see his face, but even if he could, he doubted he would have been able to read anything in his masked expression. Awash in the glow of twilight, there was a white carnation at the foot of the stone slab. He wondered whether Menma, whose clan ran a flower shop, had been by. Sensing Sasuke's approach, Kakashi turned around and raised a hand in greeting. Perfect timing. Ready for your training? You're 3 hours late, Sasuke said, folding his arms across his chest. Kakashi feigned a look of surprise. I don't know what you're talking about. Karen POV. There weren't enough cots in the medical tent for all the groaning ninja being carried in. Strewn across the hectic space, ninja with blood-stained bandages wrapped around their heads or the stumps of what had once been limbs drifted fitfully in and out of consciousness. Shouts filled the air as medic nin rushed back and forth, their palms glowing with medical ninjutsu. One of them noticed Karen and impatiently waved her over. Well, come on. It's about time you got here. The unhealed bite marks on her body were already starting to prickle. Karen hesitated. And the medic nin, scowling, grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to a man with a head wound. She braced herself as the man hefted himself up. Then, baring his teeth around her wrist, he bit down. Hot pain seared through her body, and she felt the immediate loss of chakra. This continued, bite after bite after bite, until Karen was so spent, she could no longer prop her own head up. Her whole body was covered in new bites, she felt as empty as a dried husk. But there must have been a few drops of chakra left within her, for she was still alive. And with that, she was left to lie down in a corner to recover. They had learned their lesson with her mother. In her crushing weariness, Karen closed her heavy eyes. And when she opened them again, sunlight streamed painfully into her eyes. As soon as the stars had disappeared, she saw the head ninja of their village, Zasui, appraising her with his cold gray eyes. His words for her were as usual, emotionless and to the point. The Hidden Leaf will be hosting the Chunin exams this year. You're going in one of our Genin teams. This is your chance to redeem yourself from your failure in Sunagakure, and I'll be personally there to watch this time. You know what will happen if you fail me again. With the threat hanging in the air, he left her to pick up after herself. The memory of the look on Zasui's face when he found out that none of the Kusa Genin had passed the Chunin exam still brought goosebumps. She suspected the only reason why she hadn't been drained of her chakra on the spot was because the daimyo of their country had personally commended Karen on her fight in the third test. Zasui had said it to her. Your only use is your chakra. Karen lived alone in a hut along the fringes of the village. The area was empty, despite the increasing shortage of ninja as of late. Kusagakure was sending more and more out on missions to earn money for the village. 2 houses down, there was an older woman named Midori who had used to share some of her food with Karen. She had been sent out 5 months ago and had never returned. Just as she closed the door behind her, Karen's stomach growled loudly and she considered her options. She could go back to the medical camp for food. But her chakra reserves were still low, and she knew they would make her heal again. So instead, Karen lay herself down on the ground. It was early morning, and a few rays of daylight seeped into her hut through the cracks in the roof. However, in the haze of her weariness, everything seemed dark. She shut her eyes, but it was the same. There were no chakra signatures around her, it was dark, and she was alone. She felt herself drifting away and wished she would never have to open her eyes again. Time passed, and hunger pains shook her awake. Sluggishly getting up, Karen put a hand over her grumbling stomach and made up her mind. Though she lacked the energy to go hunting, there were plenty of patches of mushrooms and greens to placate her hunger. The sun shone high in the sky. It burned the back of her neck as Karen slowly gathered what she found in a woven basket. As she got farther and farther away from her village, she eventually found a riverbed. Taking care to put down the basket, she lowered herself by the water and rinsed the dirt off a mushroom. Closing her eyes, she opened her mouth to eat it. When she froze. While she hadn't been paying attention, there was a large chakra signature in her vicinity. It couldn't belong to any of the villagers, it was so large, it far eclipsed theirs. Was it in the water? Reaching for a kunai, Karen backed away from the river's edge and retreated into the forest. Though it was possible the owner of the chakra had already caught sight of her, she suppressed her chakra and watched from the shade of a tree. A beat passed. And then two. The river's surface broke. A bare-chested boy. No, a teenager, stepped out of the water on the other side of the riverbank. The first thing she noticed was his hair, it was red, burning like fire in the sunlight. The second thing she noticed was that he was holding a large fish in each hand, which explained what he had been doing in the water. Her gaze shot to the basket she had left by the riverside. However, he didn't seem to have noticed as without a look back, he began to head into the forest. There was something familiar about him, both physically and in his chakra. His hair color was the same as hers, and it wasn't a common color by any means. Everything still felt cloudy, but she racked her mind, and soon, a hazy memory drifted into her consciousness. A small red-haired Genin, holding a blade to her neck. Could it be him? The leaf Genin she'd fought against in the Chunin exam? Karen closed her eyes and checked his chakra signature again. She shuddered. It was him. It had matured in the years since she'd last felt the chakra, but it shared similarities to the one she remembered, cold and guarded, and intermixed with an immense dark chakra that made her stomach twist. However, as she probed deeper, she started to note several differences. Where it had previously been cold enough to cause her to flinch, it was now cool in the way the river water had felt on her hot hand. And where it had been rough, it now seemed more worn down, there were rounded edges in the place of sharp corners. It was chakra full of contradictions, and Karen wasn't quite sure what to make of it. When she opened her eyes, the chakra signature disappeared and all she could see was the riverbank. No, she peered her eyes and checked. There was something there. After making sure nobody else was around, she came out of her hiding spot and waded through the river to the other side. There, where the teen had been standing, was one of the fishes he'd been holding, flopping about on the rocks. Karen felt her heart stop. There was no way he'd dropped the fish on accident. Had he noticed her before she hid her presence? Why had he left this fish behind? Was it poisonous? Her stomach rumbled. After a moment's pause, she added the fish to her basket. When Karen returned home from scavenging, she cooked the fish over a campfire. The smell of freshly cooked fish caused her to salivate, and she quickly tore into it, burning the roof of her mouth as she did so. It hurt, and she was no stranger to pain, but for some reason, her eyes began to sting. Taking off her glasses, she rubbed her face clean. Had food always been this delicious? The fish must not have been toxic for that night, she found herself still alive, and she wondered why. She wondered whether Zasui would knock on her door. And as she lay on the ground looking up at the dark sky through the cracks in her ceiling, she had a sudden thought. Had that boy left the fish behind for her? Just before she drifted away, the memory of her last fight as a Genin came back to her. It had been far away from here, in wind country, where the air was dry and the sand shone in the moonlight. They had brought out a white cloth there with names etched on it in black, showing the matchups for the third exam. She could remember it now. It had been the very first name. Uzumaki Naruto. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29. Man of the World. Jiraiya called it gathering research for his novel series. Naruto called it peeping on the women's bath. Once they had reached Snow Country and took up residence at one of the inns, the older man had made himself comfortable in front of the wooden fence that separated the gendered baths. It was not an unfamiliar sight for Naruto. Though the last time he had seen Jiraiya in such a position, they had been strangers. Naruto paused beside him. "You're a pervert, aren't you?" The sage seemed to take offense to this. Tearing his eyes away from whatever vision he had been admiring, he shook a finger in Naruto's face. "Such mislaid accusations. You don't seem to realize the considerable following my books have. If these ladies understood how much of this is for the greater good, they'd be lining up for a chance with the great Jiraiya. And there's something you seem to be mistaken about." Drawing back and straightening his shoulders, he pointed at himself. "I'm not just a pervert. I'm a super pervert." Naruto found himself at a loss for words. Without responding, he left Jiraiya to his own devices and returned to the outdoor springs. It was empty, and as he settled in, fresh water was pumped into the spring, filling the air with hissing steam. Snow drifted down from the sky. Several flakes landed on his skin, and the rest disappeared into the hot water. He knew he was alone. And yet there in the spring, he thought he could hear someone whispering beside him. Closing his eyes, he let his body sink into the water, and everything fell silent. Land of grass. The land was thick with forests and rivers that teemed with freshly spawned fish. In terms of terrain and climate, grass country was the most similar to fire country out of all the other countries Naruto had visited thus far. Which made sense, as they were neighboring countries. During the day, Naruto practiced incorporating his nature release into his Rasengan. At night, they sat around the glow of a campfire, eating the fish Naruto had caught. Some nights passed in silence as Jiraiya wrote furiously in his notebooks. Other nights, they discussed Naruto's progress or planned where to head next. The matter still felt rather strange to Naruto. When Jiraiya had invited him along his journey, Naruto had accepted without putting too much thought into it. At the time, he had only wanted to get away from it all. But as time passed and everything started to take on the faded glaze of the past, Naruto was beginning to wonder more and more what Jiraiya stood to earn from this. One night, as Jiraiya picked at his teeth with a fish bone, he asked Naruto about his parents. "I never knew them," was all Naruto had to say. Jiraiya wore a carefully guarded expression. "I knew them. Very well, in fact. You have Kushina's hair, but you look like the spitting image of Minato at your age. I can tell you more." "No, that's okay," Naruto broke in. A pause. "Are you sure? They're gone and knowing more about them won't help me," he stated simply. Once upon a time, Naruto would have jumped at the chance to learn more about his parents. He had used to haunt the archives, pouncing on even the slightest possible reference to his familial roots. But that yearning belonged to a past age, to a child longing for the possibility of what could have been. Now, the only thing Naruto was concerned with was the present and the reality that came with it. To survive in this world, he needed to grow stronger. That was what he kept telling himself, anyways. The fire between them crackled, its heat warming his face. Jiraiya lowered the fish bone from his mouth. "All right then. Tomorrow, we'll work on getting you an animal summons." "The toad summons? You can sign the toad contract if you want. Or you can try doing what I did to find the animal you have a natural affinity for." The next morning, as Jiraiya looked on, Naruto bit his finger for the blood offering. Molding his chakra with the appropriate hand seals, he planted his hand on the ground. Nothing happened. Several seconds passed in silence. Stroking his chin, Jiraiya looked bemused. "Huh." Land of lightning. Lightning flashed. Thunder rumbled in the distance. It turned out that the Land of Lightning was a country of vast mountain ranges. Its name came from the year-long thunderstorms that lit up the clouds. Jiraiya's reasoning for their presence there was as follows. "I noticed you were using your lightning release to speed up your reflexes. But it's unrefined. And there's no better place to hone your lightning release than in this country." Naruto stood in the middle of a storm. He could see lightning fork out in the cold mist around him like branches of a tree. His whole body was tingling. He could feel the hair on his body standing on end. And then with a deafening boom, it struck him. Waves of electricity seared through every cell of his body. He was going to burst into flames, he was going to explode. And then it released him. Naruto fell to his knees, panting. Steam rose off of his skin. It felt as though someone had taken his lightning release, magnified it 100 times, and then deep-fried him with it. "Let's try that again," said Jiraiya. "How is this going to help me?" Naruto asked bluntly. Jiraiya made a low sound of disapproval. "I've seen you wincing while using your lightning release. If it's hurting you, you're not allocating it properly. To do that, your body needs to grow accustomed to conducting electricity. And just how many more times am I going to have to be struck? Maybe a couple dozen times, I'd say. So your plan is to barbecue me?" A flash of lightning lit up the sage's face as he stroked his chin in contemplation. Remind me, how many shadow clones can you make?" Land of Earth. The border of Earth country ran along a rocky mountain range, while the country itself was comprised of desolate rocky ravines. The wind blowing from the north passed over the mountains, raining down bits of rock and gravel on the traveling pair. "Here we are," said Jiraiya, balancing on a board at the tip of a spindly rock column. "This is where we'll be spending the next few weeks." He failed to mention, however, that they would be spending their nights there as well. Whenever Naruto wearily nodded off to sleep, he fell and awoke to find himself hurtling down through the air. In the beginning, he came dangerously close to being speared to death. And was only saved at the last moment by an extension of Jiraiya's hair that grabbed him inches from the rocky ground. But as the days passed, His reaction speed grew faster, and he started to use a wind jutsu to propel himself back into the air. And then as even more time passed, he stopped falling at all. When 3 days had passed since Naruto's last fall, Jiraiya declared that their training there was complete. "Where are we going next?" he asked, secretly relieved to leave. Sniffing the air, Jiraiya wrinkled his nose. "A bathhouse." Sometime later. At Jiraiya's insistence, not all their time was spent in training. They made a day trip to tea country to visit one of their famous tea houses. The menu boasted an eel-infused brew that, according to the cackling sage, increased a man's vitality. "Give it a couple decades and you'll understand," was all he said. They paid several visits each to the land of noodles and the land of garlic, where after a taste of the local specialties, Jiraiya declared, "A frog in a well knows nothing of the great ocean." They were warmly welcomed in the land of fangs, a country filled with mountains jutting from the earth. It turned out the daimyo was a big fan of Jiraiya's Icha books. The land of birds was a warm tropical country filled with flocks of migratory birds from all over the world and, according to Jiraiya, with the most beautiful women in the world. In contrast, the land of frost was always cold and dotted with towering ice sculptures in the tundra. They continued to travel. The seasons slowly passed, sometimes in order and more oftentimes not, as they crossed borders. The blue of winter melted into new leaf buds that peeked out from bare branches. Flowers bloomed and fell, their petals swept away by rain. The days grew longer and the nights shorter, and before Naruto knew it, nearly a year had passed since he'd first left the hidden leaf. One summer day, as they moved further inland through a mountainous region, it began to rain. Feeling the first drop of water hit his cheek, Naruto looked up. It was late afternoon, and the sun was still shining in the sky. There wasn't a single cloud to be seen. But all of a sudden, it began to pour. Jiraiya pointed at something in the distance. "Why don't we take cover until the rain passes?" It appeared to be the roof of a wooden structure peeking out from between the trees. As the rain continued to pelt them, they took a beaten trail that turned into a stone stairway lined with unlit lanterns. Eventually, they passed under a wooden torii gate, and when the structure finally came into view, Naruto belatedly realized it was an old shrine. Jiraiya rummaged in his pockets for a coin, which he tossed into an offering box at the altar. Bowing, he clapped his hands before bowing again. Noticing Naruto watching him, he said in a sage tone, "Rule of thumb. Avoid making enemies where you can." The shrine smelled of moss and musty old wood. It continued to pour outside. The sound of raindrops hitting the roof drowned out the sound of Jiraiya's scribbling pen. Leaning his head against a column, Naruto closed his eyes and fell asleep. He was usually so tired from his training that he passed out at night and woke up in the morning without remembering a thing. But this time, he dreamed, and he dreamed fitfully. When Naruto's eyes snapped open, his heart was racing and his palms were damp with sweat. It was nighttime. He could make out the dark form of Jiraiya slumbering on the far side of the shrine. It had stopped raining at some point, for the air was crisp and clear. There was a girl in a kimono standing in front of the shrine, staring at him. Immediately, Naruto reached for his tanto. And then she turned around. In the pale moonlight, he saw something blue glint in her long hair. Naruto felt his heart stop. The girl fled. Before he could stop himself, before he could hold back everything he had been keeping locked away, he called out, "Mayu! Wait." She didn't stop. She was already at the torii gate before Naruto managed to pull himself together and began to give chase. Somehow, the lanterns along the stairwell had all been lit. In the darkness, their glowing lights appeared to float in mid-air, illuminating a path much longer than what he remembered. The girl ran impossibly fast. It was as though the wind carried her. Her sandaled feet seemed to barely touch the ground. The air grew colder and thicker with fog. Finally, Naruto started to close the distance on the girl. She was right there, an arm's length away and almost within reach. "Wait!" he cried out again, his voice breaking. The girl must have heard him, for she let out a ghostly laugh. She started to turn her face towards him. And then disappeared into the fog. His heels skidding on the ground, Naruto came to a quick stop. He spun in a circle, but couldn't make out anything. Almost fumbling in his impatience, his hands blurred through the seals. Wind style? Great breakthrough. Naruto exhaled, all the air leaving his lungs in a single rush, and a strong wind swept through the area, blowing away the mist. It left him alone in a forest clearing. There was no one else there. As the rest of his surroundings came into sharp focus, he suddenly realized that the jutsu hadn't cleared up just a mist, it had cleared up his mind as well. His stomach twisted, and Naruto felt burgeoning disgust for himself. What was he doing, chasing a phantom from his nightmares in the middle of the night? Just as he was about to leave the area, however, he heard it. A faint rustling sound in a nearby bush. In an instant, Naruto moved. Reaching for a kunai with one hand, he lunged forward with the other and made contact. It was warm and had the texture of fur, and as soon as his hand tightened around it, it began to struggle furiously in his grasp. Paying little heed, Naruto yanked it out of the bush. It was larger than a cat but smaller than a wolf, with a bushy tail and a reddish coat. It was a fox, its pointy ears lay flat on its head, and it yowled angrily, flailing in the air before him. "What's the big deal?" it yelped. "Let go of me." "Was that you?" Naruto demanded. "It was just a little prank, I swear, no harm intended." Naruto reeled. And in a flash, it seized the chance to bite his hand. Letting out a startled cry, his grip slackened. Wriggling out of his hold, it dropped to the ground and disappeared with a rustle into the bushes. Blood dripped from his hand. Naruto stared after the bushes. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted mournfully. Letting his hand drop to his side, Naruto's legs collapsed below his weight and he landed on his back on the ground. With that, the rows of trees gave way to the night sky. The first thing he noticed were the stars. They glimmered, shining like scattered dust across a black sea. He thought of how far away they were and how small he was in comparison. It brought back a memory of the first time Naruto had entered the academy. Nervous and excited, he had looked up at the sign that hung above the doors and traced the character for shinobi in his palm. The separate characters of blade and heart came together in a word that by definition meant to endure. "How do you deal with it, sensei?" "We endure." When the Nine Tails had been egging him on in the battlefield, that had been Kakashi's answer as well. To endure. What did it mean to endure? Did it mean to forget? He had thought that by traveling the world with Jiraiya, he would be able to fill the void in his chest. To this end, for the past year, he had tried his best to avoid thinking about anything other than his training and his new experiences. As he looked up at the stars, however, just for that moment, he allowed himself to think about what he had left behind, and his heart ached. "It's hard, sensei," Naruto said aloud. But there was no response. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30. The road continues. The great toad sage was waiting for Jiraiya in a shallow pool of water surrounded by giant scrolls. Here it is revealed. "In my dream, despite your perversions, you will manage to become a splendid shinobi. You will come to stand on your own 2 feet, acquiring disciples. One such disciple will one day bring about a great change to the world of shinobi. This I saw in my dream." "A great change?" Jiraiya repeated. "Either great stability or great destruction. The likes of which this world has never seen before. One of those 2 changes. One of those 2. What do you mean?" The sage's right eye opened a crack. The dark pupil stared straight into what felt like Jiraiya's soul. "You will guide that revolution. And eventually, there shall come a day when you will be forced to make a critical decision. That choice you make will decide which way the change goes." His mind churned with questions, the weight of the prophecy already bearing heavily on his shoulders. What do I do? In order to make the correct choice? In my dream you walk the world, writing books. Books? Naruto, POV. A flash of red sparked brilliantly in the puddle by his feet. Naruto's eyes narrowed, but he didn't stop moving. The fox had been following him all morning, making no real effort to conceal its movements. He had a feeling it had been on his scent for longer than he'd realized. As soon as they'd crossed from rice country into hot water country, Jiraiya waved Naruto off with a conspiring glint in his eye. "I think it's about time I took off." Out of consideration for each other's sanity, they had taken to occasionally splitting off for a day at a time. Naruto usually spent the time training with his clones, and as for Jiraiya, well, he assumed the older man had his own needs to take care of. The path Naruto chose took him through a bamboo grove. Green bamboo trunks shot up from the ground, crowding the sky. Rays of sunlight filtered through, reflecting off the trunks and lighting his way through the forest. Crack! His gaze shot to the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. While it was clear the fox was still on his trail, it was maintaining its distance, making it difficult to pinpoint its current location. Naruto wondered whether his previous summons attempt hadn't been as unsuccessful as they'd thought. The only question was, why had it not revealed itself to him? Judging by the lack of hostility, it didn't seem to have any malicious intent, notwithstanding its previous attempt at a prank. When he decided he'd had enough, he stopped. "Come on out already." A summer breeze blew through the grove, and he heard the bamboo trunks crackle. In the distance, a bird whistled. Then with a rustle, the fox emerged from the thicket. In the daylight, Naruto was able to get a much better look at it. It looked like an ordinary red fox, albeit dressed in a black Haori coat. To his bemusement, it lay on the ground and let out a yawn. "What's for lunch?" Judging by the tone of its voice, it was a male fox. Though, the fact that it was talking at all meant that it wasn't an ordinary animal. "Why are you following me? What is it that you want?" When the fox didn't respond, letting out another yawn instead, Naruto raised a hand to the handle of his tanto. The fox was back up in a flash, his tail swishing in the air. All right, I'll tell you, so calm down." Folding his arms across his chest, Naruto looked at the fox expectantly. With a delicate cough, the fox bent his forelegs in a stiff bow. "My name is Amakuro. You summoned me here with that pitiful offering, and I've been following you to see whether you're worthy of signing my contract." That confirmed it. His natural affinity was for a fox. The irony of the situation didn't escape Naruto, and he had to wonder whether his being the Jinchuriki for the purported demon fox had anything to do with it. "So why did you turn into my teammate? How do you know who she is?" "I didn't and I don't." The fox, Amakuro, licked at a paw. "I was testing you with an illusion. You saw only what you didn't want to see." "Didn't want to see?" What did that mean? In an effort to clear his head, Naruto exhaled. "Well, then, am I worthy?" Amakuro let out another yawn. "No, I don't think so. You don't talk much, and you're too violent. I'm going to pass on this one." Caught off guard, Naruto blinked. While he didn't know what he'd been expecting, it certainly hadn't been rejection. A thorn of irritation was starting to twist in his chest. And for some reason, that irritated him even more. He hadn't expected himself to care at all. "Fine then." It was Amakuro's turn to look taken aback as he said quickly, "That's it? Just so you know, I'm pretty powerful. You're going to lose out big time by not signing a contract with me. I mean, where else are you going to get a summons as good as me?" "I don't need a summons," said Naruto. Or so he told himself, anyways. As he left the fox behind, he felt a sharp gaze trained on his back. But he could no longer hear anything behind him. Later. It was sunset by the time Naruto reached the village of Ugakure, where he was supposed to rendezvous with Jiraiya. He hesitated before he stepped past the entrance gates. And then pushed his legs forward. Had it really been 5 years since he'd last visited this place? It looked almost exactly the same as it had back then. While there were a few new resort hotels, the hot springs and the crowd of tourists had remained the same. It was as though the incident with Hidan had never happened at all. Colorful lights bobbed in the distance, and as Naruto made his way toward it, he realized a summer festival was going on in the center of the village. Glowing lanterns dangled in the darkening sky. Smoke rose from the food stalls, filling his nose with the smells of fried dough and grilled meats. Some of the attendants wore masks as they strolled between the attractions. There was a stall with a pool full of glimmering goldfish. 3 children were huddled around it, and just as he passed by, one of them shouted out, "Look at that fat one." Something about the wording brought Naruto to a sudden halt. Everything was spinning, and for a moment, it was as though he'd been transported back in time. If he just looked, it almost felt as though he'd see 2 shadows walking in step behind him. He didn't look. Instead, he stood there, rooted to the spot. The crowd's chatter surrounding him seemed to rise in volume, filling his ears. "Naruto?" He stiffened, but it was a young boy staring uncertainly up at Naruto's Hittite. There was one around his neck as well. It wasn't the first Hittite Naruto had seen in the village. It seemed that for all its increasing tourism, Ugakure still had a population of aspiring ninja. "Yes," he said. Recognition flooded the other boy's face, and he pointed at himself. "Do you remember me? I'm Taki. You saved me." Naruto did a double take. In his memories, the child he'd saved in the midst of Hidan's slaughter had been barely older than a toddler. And yet the boy in front of him was already starting to lose his baby fat. While he was still shorter than Naruto, coming up to his shoulders, Naruto had a sinking feeling that he would soon be outstripped. It seemed not everything had stayed the same after all. "I remember you," he said. The corners of his lips spasmed up in a shot at a smile, but from the other boy's faltering expression, it wasn't one of his better attempts. "Where's the rest of your team?" asked Taki, looking around. Naruto felt his throat constrict. "They're not here. It's just me." "Oh." Taki stopped. It would have been nice to see everyone. His face brightened. "Still, I'm really glad you're here. Hey, why don't you let me show you around?" He hesitated. If it was anyone else, he would have declined. However, for this one vestige of nostalgia, he let the younger boy lead him around the village. As Taki prattled on about his life over the past 5 years, Naruto found himself becoming swept away in the account of the family noodle business which had failed, causing them to seek a better life in Rice Country. After another abject failure there, the family had recently returned to the village to start again. But I told my parents not to worry. Taki tapped the Hittite resting around his neck. I'm going to become a top-notch ninja and take care of them. There was a quieter section of the festival, separated from the colorful stalls and the crowd's chatter by billows of warm steam that rose up from holes in the ground. A small shrine stood there, dimly lit by candles. "What's this?" asked Naruto. He didn't remember seeing such a place before. Taki's face was solemn. "This is where we remember everyone who died that night. My parents and I come here often to burn incense." In a flash, Naruto remembered that the boy hadn't escaped the incident unscathed, he had lost his sibling. Feeling the need to say something, he said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't save your sister." It had never before occurred to Naruto to be apologetic, but even as he spoke, he suddenly realized that he did feel sorry to the young boy standing before him. Taki shook his head. "To be honest with you, I don't really remember her much anymore." He touched his hair, a long thin braid trailed down from the side, and smiled. "The one thing I remember is that mother used to braid her hair. That's why I grew this out. So I don't forget." Naruto paused, debating whether he should say it. If it's any consolation, Hidan is dead. Rai killed him in battle. According to the reports, with his unique brand of immortality, Hidan wasn't strictly dead. However, the Anbu ops had gathered the separate pieces and sealed them away, so he was as close to dead as possible. Taki's eyebrows shot up. Far from the expression of approval Naruto had been expecting, he looked troubled. "Oh. I see. So, he's dead already." Something about his tone seemed off, and Naruto asked, "Did you want to kill him yourself?" "I think I did at one point. But," Taki inhaled. "Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful he's dead. It's just, it doesn't really change anything. My sister is still gone. There's nothing you could have done about it, and there's nothing anyone can do about it now." Naruto didn't know how to respond to that. They spent a few more moments in silence in front of the shrine, and soon afterwards they went their separate ways. "Bring the rest of your team next time," said the younger boy with a wave. The festival was still ongoing, and Naruto returned to the hubbub of the crowd. As he walked aimlessly between the stalls, he couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with Taki. Even though he had lost his sister 5 years ago, he had none of the bitterness Naruto would have expected. On the contrary, despite the hardships of his circumstances, the other boy seemed to have moved on with his life. It was such an alien concept to Naruto, he found it difficult to wrap his mind around. How could you smile while thinking of someone you had lost? There had also been Taki's response when Naruto had questioned whether revenge was his goal. It doesn't really change anything. On that, Naruto silently agreed. When he had transformed into the Nine Tails, he had flattened Hidan and sent the rest scattering. And yet, it hadn't changed anything. It was possible he had already understood this back at Gato's hideout when Naruto had spared the hunter Nin, despite his role in Mayu's capture. At the time, he had questioned what had moved him to do so. But perhaps, he realized now, it was because he didn't blame him entirely for his teammates' deaths. The truth was that if Naruto had done his job as leader and ordered his team members back to Konoha, even if Mayu had hated him for it, they would all at least still be alive. However, he had caved in and stayed because he had feared their rejection. While many things had happened, in the end, what had cost him their lives was none other than his own weakness. Suddenly, Naruto realized something warm was running down his wrists. Looking down, he jerked as he saw blood. His fingers had dug into his palms so hard, they'd pierced the skin. As he watched the blood drip to the ground, he felt a heated surge of shame. Wiping his hands clean on the front of his pants, he thought to himself, "Keep it together." The abrupt sound of barking drew him out of his thoughts. It was an ugly, angry sound that shattered the cheer of the festival. Naruto quickly spotted the source. Near a food stall, a large black dog growled at a young girl, baring its teeth in a show of aggression. "Down, boy." The dog's owner threw himself on the dog's back to try and stop it. Her face hidden under a mask, the girl backed away, her slight frame shaking. And then Naruto saw it. A tail appeared, poking out from the back of her robes. The dog's owner must have spotted it at the same time, for in a remarkable transition, his concerned face transformed into one of revulsion. He fell back and released the dog, which lunged for the girl. But the only thing left of her was a pile of clothes. Naruto glimpsed the back of a red animal scampering away before it disappeared into the dark of the forest. Cupping his hands around his mouth, the owner shouted out, "And you stay away." A murmuring audience had gathered to watch the spectacle. Naruto took in their reactions, which ranged from confusion to utter disgust, before approaching the owner. "Is something the matter?" he asked. The owner, a heavy-set man, squinted suspiciously at Naruto's features. "You one of them foxes too?" "I'm a ninja," said Naruto, tapping his leaf hitai meaningfully. Scratching his whining dog's head, the man grunted. "Can't be too careful with these things. Hadn't seen one around for ages. They're bad luck, they are, and thieves at that. If they linger for too long, you know that means something bad is going to happen. But you'll know all about that, I'm sure." "What do you mean?" Raising an eyebrow, the man tapped his forehead. "You're a leaf nin, so I'm surprised you don't know. Rumors say it was a fox with 100 tails that destroyed your village way back when." Beckoning towards his dog, the man added in a low voice, "After seeing that fox, you'd better watch yourself tonight." With the man's departure, the audience began to disperse, and soon, it was as though nothing had ever happened. The crowd moved around Naruto, their conversations fading in and out like waves on the shore. The stall was selling inarizushi, rice stuffed in fried tofu pouches. Naruto bought one and bit into it. A sweet and yet salty flavor spread in his mouth, and he quickly finished it. His stomach gurgled, and realizing he hadn't eaten all day, he bought another one and scarfed that down as well. Once he had satisfied his appetite, Naruto was about to leave the festival when a stray thought suddenly struck him. It was so simple, he thought. When you were hungry, you ate. He looked down at his stinging palms. The blood had dried and he could see it already healing. Letting his hands fall back down by his sides, he made up his mind. Naruto bought a box of the inarizushi and walked into the forest. The sounds and lights of the festival faded behind him, and he was soon alone. The summer breeze that brushed against his skin was cool, and the dark sky above was filled with stars. He came to a stop before one of the trees and lowered himself on a knee. A wary voice came from the branches above his head. "What, are you here to mock me?" Naruto placed the box down on the ground. "I brought a better offering." A beat passed. And then with a rustle, the fox jumped down to the ground. Wearing a cautious expression, he examined Naruto's face. Before dashing forward and tearing into the fried tofu. Clearing his throat, Naruto said, "Just so you know, I'm the Jinchuriki of the 9 tails." "So you are." "Munch, munch. And I am a fox." Naruto hesitated. "What can I do to be worthy?" Rice sticking to his snout, Amakuro said, "You can start by getting me another box of this." Later. Jiraiya had yet to make an appearance. No doubt, he was off doing more research for his novels. And so Naruto booked a lone room for himself in an inn that evening. Laying back on the futon, he looked up at the dark ceiling before closing his eyes. You saw only what you didn't want to see. He had thought about Amakuro's words all day, and after talking to Taki, he thought he had an inkling as to why he had seen Mayu on that night. Maybe he had known all along. Naruto had tried to let go of the past to endure, like Kakashi had told him to. He had tried to replace his team with his training, in the hopes that everything he was feeling would go away. However, even though he had tried to forget, the void was still there, as raw as it had been since the day he'd first felt it. How could you smile when you were alone? How could you endure when it was your fault? There were so many things Naruto didn't understand, no matter how much he thought about it. Even if he spent the rest of his life scouring through the archives. His sanctuary where he had once thought he'd unearthed the secrets of the world. He knew that he would never be able to find the answers he needed there. His heart was spinning with regrets, and his head was spinning with questions. But at some point in the night, the smell of inarizushi lingering on his clothes carried him to sleep. The next morning, when Naruto woke up, he found a note waiting for him. Sliding the door of the inn open with a clatter, he left the establishment. The sun was just starting to rise, the rest of the village was still asleep, and the air was still with silence. Blearily making his way to the village entrance, he spotted a lone figure leaning against the gates. As his eyes adjusted to the glow of the sunlight, the grinning face of Jiraiya came into focus. "We've got a long journey ahead of us," said the sage. "If you thought your training until now was hard, I've got something coming for you." Taking in a deep breath, Naruto rolled back his shoulders. And then with a nod, he took a step forward. If there was one thing he had learned over the past year, it was that there were still many things that he didn't understand. But he wanted to learn. End of chapter 30.